Hey, how are you? SliceofOtaku, and with Avatar The Last Airbender being the amazing series it is, and one that's actually even better than you probably remember, a ton of people, myself included, have desired more at some point or another. And I'm not even talking about The Legend of Korra, which is an animal all its own. I mean more Last Airbender, a continuation of the original story. And not too long ago, the former head writer for the Last Airbender series, Aaron Ehasz, admitted that there were once plans to do just that, but were ultimately scrapped for the sake of that live-action movie that we all try our best to forget. Which is kind of a bummer, but certainly won't stop us from speculating, so we'll be doing just that. Detailing the possible contents of what would have been Avatar The Last Airbender, Book 4, Air. Now, to be fair, in terms of the Last Airbender continuity, there is an actual continuation in the form of the graphic novel series. However, although I for the most part enjoy them, I most definitely wouldn't credit them to be a proper furtherance of the original story for a few reasons. The first being that despite them both being a display of several drawings, the mediums of film and comics are very different. It's not as if the situation mirrors that of manga to anime, where the translation of contents is intentionally facilitated. The Avatar comics are heavily restricted in terms of how much time they have to convey a particular message, whereas with the television series, we're used to such things being spread pretty far out.
Turns out clouds are made of water.
It's just a cloud. Wait, a cloud. Fly up and bend the water from that cloud into my pouch.
And at that, the action sequences are understandably shallow in comparison, as accurate martial arts choreography was an integral part of the show, to the point where the fights themselves told a wordless story, and so you of course miss out majorly there. And lastly, the timing of it all. Avatar The Last Airbender concluded its television run in 2008, with the continuation comics releasing 4 years later in 2012. Which is a while, but the real issue lies with the other continuation that released that very same year. The Last Airbender comics were made to be complementary to The Legend of Korra, as opposed to being a proper furtherance of the original story, for the sake of facilitating nostalgia and generating hype. So much so that in the cases of both the Rift and North and South trilogies, their plot lines are intentionally related to the central themes of Korra Book 2, with the solutions to these conflicts purposefully leaving readers somewhat unsatisfied for the sake of a resolution being provided on Korra's end. Which is pretty laughable considering the vast majority of fans consider Book 2 of The Legend of Korra to be the absolute worst season of the series. So yeah, the comics are cool, but they're no substitute for a true Book 4. The Avatar series cleverly separated its seasons into books, with each of them being reflective of a particular element. And thanks to the ever-wise words of Uncle Iroh, we as fans know the general concepts each of these elements provide. Book 1 was water, the element of change, which provides concepts of adaptation, community, and familial bonds. With this season, we focused on the establishment of a family structure amongst our newly found Team Avatar, who had each lost family to some extent, but continued to live their lives nonetheless. We also had the reintroduction of the Avatar to the world, and with word spreading of his return, the world was set on a path of positive change. And on the flip side, we had Prince Zuko's refusal of change, being unable to accept his banishment and the severance of his connection to his father. Book 2 was dubbed Earth, the element of substance, providing concepts of persistence and endurance. We began this season with Aang's learning of an element which completely contrasted his own nature, with a teacher, unlike any he'd had previously, requiring much determination and hard work. Later, we had the loss of Appa, which was hard on them all, to the point where Aang in particular had a hard time upholding his solemn vows of non-aggression. But by being there for one another, Team Avatar was able to persist against the odds. Inversely, we had Prince Zuko's gradual change for the better, with him ultimately breaking for the sake of restoring his honor. Book 3 was named Fire, the element of power, emphasizing desire and the drive to achieve. This season was a major display of power across the board. We had the introduction of bloodbending, one of the most powerful abilities in the series, and Katara's refusal of it. We had Sokka's learning of the sword, establishing him as a far more credible warrior. Fire Lord Ozai's lust for world domination as the Phoenix King, and the extent to which he would go for the fulfillment of his ambitions. The power of Sozin's comet propelling the clash between the Fire Lord and the Avatar to new heights, and even the crushing weight of the crown in the case of Azula, a weight which would soon befall Zuko as his individual pursuit of honor would shift to the restoration of honor for an entire nation. In the case of a hypothetical Book 4, the only remaining element would be air, the element of freedom, which very much deals with the concept of peace. This once war-ravaged world was now suddenly devoid of such major conflict, and adjusting to such change can be jarring for those who find comfort in habit, and that applies to all sides of the equation. Theatrically, excluding sequels, it's actually somewhat rare for a series to venture beyond the end of a climactic battle or war. But in a lot of ways, that's where some of the greatest stories may be told. It's amazing that our heroes won and saved the world, but what's to become of this world that they've saved? Throughout the series, as the Avatar, Aang's mission had always been twofold: the defeat of the Fire Lord and the restoration of balance. With the end of Book 3, he successfully defeated Fire Lord Ozai, but doing such a thing doesn't instantly establish a state of balance. Over the course of 100 years, the Fire Nation had latched its tendrils to all corners of the globe, with a presence that was sure to be felt beyond the war. Fire Lord Sozin initiated a war bred from his own psychotic brand of nationalism, which spread to his people by means of extreme propaganda and intense rhetoric, which only further permeated throughout their society for generations. And if we were to disregard the countless travesties this war induced upon the world for just a moment, we would be able to recognize just how much it truly benefited the Fire Nation. Because economically, you can't get much better than the widely sustainable expansions of employment, territory, and technology that this war provided. And with that, whether the issues be ideological, economic, or a combination of the two, I'd imagine such drastic changes would negatively impact the vast majority of the populace to some degree, which would then in turn lead to unrest and possible resistance. Not to mention the mounting tensions induced by otherworld powers seeking reprimands and those who are unable to provide such forgiveness. I mean, how do you even begin to deal with such a wounded world? The pondering and mitigation of which would have to be a major focus for Avatar Aang and Fire Lord Zuko. However, on a bit of a lighter note, with the end of the war, Aang and Katara would finally have enough time to actively pursue a romantic relationship. But with that being said, the work of an Avatar is never ending, which is surely a reality Katara would be very well aware of, having traveled with him for so long, but the dynamics of a friendship may at times be quite different from that of romance, so the challenges would be pretty new to the both of them. And like seeing the world after a climactic battle, I always appreciate when a series actually gives a long-awaited relationship screen time beyond a single kiss, because a relationship and the pursuit of one are very different stories. And seeing the reactions of our other characters, especially the ones closest to them, would be priceless. But darting back to the other side of our story, for the vast majority of the series, as we established a bit earlier, Zuko's experience had been juxtaposed to that of Team Avatars. But even still, with them venturing all across the world, in his pursuit of the Avatar, Zuko had just as much of an adventure as they did. And all the while, his greatest desire had been the restoration of his honor and admiration of his father. Becoming Fire Lord was never an ambition of his, but more like something he had to do for the sake of the world. Fire Lord Ozai's intentions of utilizing the comet were sudden, and as such, so were Zuko's in relation to the throne. With this being the case, as Fire Lord, Zuko would be effectively restricting his own freedom, something I doubt he would value until he no longer had it, as even after becoming Fire Lord, he desired answers when it came to his mother. And previously, he'd be able to go on a grand search at his leisure, but in such a position, he'd certainly have a hard time doing so. With the comic series, when he sets out to do this, he places Uncle Iroh in charge. But in the case of a 4th season to the television series, I really doubt that we jump around as much as the comics did in terms of time progression, especially not for the sake of a single plot thread. And at that, passing the baton off to your uncle when your people need you the most, all for the sake of satisfying your own curiosity, wouldn't be a very good look. But beyond that, the search for his mother wouldn't be a journey for him to embark on alone. For the very first time in her life, Princess Azula would be free from the constraint of the throne. But this newfound freedom wouldn't necessarily rid her of the baggage she carries from her past. And I think that self-loathing of her own nature and circumstances could be something Zuko, as her older brother, could relate to and help her through. And this is something Aaron Ehas specifically mentions would have been a thing, as Zuko would have been able to incorporate things he's learned from Uncle Iroh's teachings into rehabilitating and consoling her, which I would have loved because in the comics, she's kind of reduced to villainy on par with that of a Scooby-Doo villain, and it just doesn't feel like a proper reflection of her character and crafty intelligence. And I mean, we've seen Azula attempt to fit in before, which gave us a glimpse at the more vulnerable character beneath, a subject thoroughly encapsulated and skillfully assessed in Tim Hickson's recent video, The Psychology of Azula, which I highly recommend. It's a subject with such psychological and emotional depth that very few shows actually have the capacity to deliver, and to me, absolutely deserves to be conveyed. And I think another potential plot point worth mentioning would have to do with Toph Beifong. Now, Toph is a fan favorite character for a bunch of reasons, but I'd say a lot of it ties into her free-spirited ways. Because Toph does as she pleases and lives on her own terms, which is no doubt an incredibly strong-willed and somewhat admirable way of living. But as we all know, things weren't always like this for her. This was a lifestyle she adorned as a means of combating the suffocating expectations of her parents. But that doesn't mean she didn't love them. And that's expressed to us at multiple points as she's tried to salvage their relationship, but each time was met with some sort of barrier. Like, it's to the point where towards the end of the series, she excitedly grouped up with Zuko, expecting some life-changing experience that would magically solve her issues, like in the case of Aang with his firebending, Sokka with Suki and his dad, and Katara with her mother's killer. So holding out on us there, for the sake of giving her problems focus later on, would have been amazing. And I mean, come on, her parental drama only took up a single episode of the show, and it's the same one she's introduced in. Compared to everyone else, she kinda got cheated. And I don't know, I'd imagine seeing both of her parents actually come to terms with who she truly is, and being able to appreciate the self-made legend she'd become would not only be meaningful to her, but also for many of us who may relate to her experience, either in the past tense or present. And it's that sort of representation and reflective writing that's already established Avatar: The Last Airbender as one of the greatest shows to have ever graced television. All in all, Book 4 would just serve to be a more conclusive end to the Last Airbender series, as it would tie up any remaining loose ends. Seeing our characters and the world they live in move beyond the war would have been so rewarding to see. But hey, even without it, the show still remains a masterpiece. But even so, I'm curious what you would have liked to have seen if Book 4 had been a thing, and whether or not you think doing the live action movie instead was a bad call. So let me know. And speaking of which, with these Avatar videos, we tend to have an influx of new viewers pull up, and a ton of people seem to wonder why Avatar, despite having ended years ago, is still being covered on YouTube, and arguably more so than ever. And I of course can only speak for myself here, but I still love Avatar, and to this day, it is, once again, one of the greatest, most lore-filled worlds to have ever graced Western animation. And because that's what we do here, gush about world building and theorize like the lore whores we are, it's just a perfect fit for the channel. And not only that, but the Avatar franchise is anything but dead right now, and is arguably more alive than most continuity-based Western cartoons. We have both The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra comics still continuing to this day, the Rise of Kyoshi novel coming this July, and even the live-action Netflix series on the way, so Avatar is thriving, and so are we as fans. There is plenty to be hype about, and I hope you'll consider sticking around for all the fun, because I mean, I certainly appreciate the general positivity you guys always flood the comments with, and having met so many of you this past May at MomoCon 2019, I am so inspired and so excited to make content that I am proud of. I tend to get in my own head a lot when it comes to consistency and uploading, but at the end of the day, I'd like to think that it all comes down to the collective experience we all have when talking about the things that we love. So I want to find every way I can to do more of that. Thank you all so much for watching, and have an awesome day. I love you.